What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. My guest today is someone who's been on the show before. It was after I watched a Netflix documentary last year. I decided to contact this person because I was completely riveted by the fact that he had been an activist for gay and civil rights for, I think, like 4 decades. And the documentary takes you through different countries that he's went to. The man has balls that are like the size of houses because he is able to go to places where most people would be afraid to go, even if they weren't an activist in a lot of cases. And I found a piece of news recently that I thought would make it relevant to have him on the show. And that is where Vladimir Putin decided that the American government or the American people, maybe, or American society and NATO were, quote, imposing perversions onto kids, which I think is just basically Putin's way of saying that they're trying to respect gay rights. So I would like to welcome back to the show, Peter Tatchell. Peter, how are you, buddy?
Good, thank you. Great to join you, James.
Thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. When I saw that I saw the story first, and then I actually went to your page, and because I thought maybe you would say something about it, because as we learned the first time that you were on the show, you did go to Russia a number of years ago to protest their anti-gay policies, I believe it was. And I was wondering, because Putin is now public enemy number one, is that issue again getting a little bit more play? It might not be for the same reasons that you would put that issue front and center, but do you find that it's like, let's hit Putin with everything we can, and being sort of homophobic is one of those issues?
Well, first, let me say that I stand in solidarity with all Russian people, gay and straight, trans and bi. I also stand in support of their civil and human rights struggle against the police state that President Putin has erected in recent years. It is very important that we show our solidarity with very brave Russians who are resisting Putin's regime, the crackdown on freedom of expression, of course, the war in Ukraine, the suppression of labor and trade union rights, and so on. So for me, LGBT plus rights is just one part of the spectrum of Putin's tyranny.
Yeah, there's no shortage of tyranny with that one. It is, when I watched the documentary, I've watched it twice. Your personal safety is something that I was always I marveled at while watching it, and then reading a bunch of the stories that were featured inside the documentary, and we're both no spring chickens anymore, but Peter, you've been doing this for so long that I am now wondering if you are done with the putting your physical self into harm's way. Like, I know that your foundation is doing really well, and I was just curious if you are sort of looking at another chapter where you're not necessarily on the front lines, or are you still going to go out there and prove to all of us that your balls are bigger than ours?
I'm not proving anything to anyone, but I'm just doing what I feel any person of conscience should do, and that is to stand up for human rights worldwide, and not just LGBT plus rights, but all human rights. And I'm certainly not done. I intend to carry on for hopefully another 25 years. Maybe I'll retire when I'm about 95, but there's still plenty of fire in me. And as you say, that Netflix documentary called Hating Peter Tatchell does give a snapshot of some of the things I've done in the past. And some of the kinds of things I hope to do in the future.
I'm curious. I just thought of this question now. What is it like to have a life calling that you remain committed to? Because there are not many people like that. There's a handful, but there are not many people like that. And I want to know if if you being who you are, if you ever even think of it, or do you ever have a moment where you sit back and you're just like, my entire life has been dedicated to this issue, and how does that make you feel? It must be bittersweet in a way, because if you're fighting for stuff, that means that there's still people that are trying to withhold rights. So there must be a sort of push and pull on that.
Well, yeah, it's extraordinary to look back over the last 55 years of my activism and think how I began way back in 1965, age 15. That was it's been a long journey. But what keeps me going is that I know that I have contributed, together with many other people, with some phenomenal, important historic changes, not just in Britain, but in many other countries around the world. And it's that level of success that's been a great motivator to keep me carrying on. My rationale is, if I can do that, then I'll have a go at this.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that, or touch on your body of work first, because, and I only want to talk about this for a second, because when I put up the promo, it pissed me off a little bit, some of the comments that come underneath it, because 55 years of activism breeds a certain kind of enemy sometimes. And I have read all of the quotes. I have read the article that you wrote. I didn't read the book that it was referring to. But can you set the record straight about the people that accuse you of advocating for lowering the age of consent? Because I know, because I read the words, what you meant, and the context was crystal clear to me. But I want to put that to rest finally, because I almost deleted the promo because there were people commenting on that, and I was trying to set them straight. And then I DM'd them the article that's at the Peter Tatchell Foundation page. And I just wanted, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this. And I asked you before if there's anything we can't talk about, and you said no. So I would like you to just comment on that, and so we can put that to rest, if that's okay.
Well, if anyone goes to my foundation website, petertatchellfoundation.org, you will find there numerous articles and statements clarifying that I, under no circumstances, condone adults having sex with children. But I think that where young people are of similar ages and they have consenting sex without any harm or complaint, then they should not be treated as criminals. Maybe they should have education and counseling. But for example, if two 15-year-olds kiss or have sex, in British law and in law of many countries, that is a serious criminal offence. And those kids can be put on the sexual offences register. That, I think, is completely different from adults having sex with kids, which is not okay in any circumstances.
Agreed. And I had sex when I was 14, and she was 14, and I got her pregnant. Would that put me in jail if I was in Britain? Like, what's the charge?
Well, it would be the number of charges under the Sexual Offences Act of 2003 in Britain. For the first time in British law, sex involving two people or one person just over or just under the age of consent became an explicit criminal offence, with a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment in a youth detention facility and placement on the sex offenders register alongside rapists and paedophiles. Now, that, I think, is
that's crazy.
So wrong to treat young people. If they know each other, they're in a supportive, committed, consenting relationship, they should not be treated as criminals. That has to be completely separate from the obvious punishment that is meted out to people who are adults and who have sex with kids.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you for clarifying. I know that it's something that, you're probably tired of talking about, but I just couldn't stomach some of the comments that I was reading underneath the promo. Also, I'd be serving a life.
Can I just add that, this line of attack to suggest that I'm somehow soft on or an apologist for pedophilia, or that I am even a pedophile myself, this is by people who can't win the arguments. They don't like what I do. They defend tyrannical regimes. They support human rights abusers. They can't win the arguments, so they try and slur me with things like being pro-pedophilia, being racist, being Islamophobic, etc., etc., etc. It's horrific, and it puts me under a lot of emotional stress and distress to be called things that I know I'm not and would never ever support as a human rights defender. But I think it does show that I'm hitting a nerve, that people have to resort to such desperate measures because they just haven't got the arguments or the evidence to counter what I'm saying.
Yeah, one of the jump offs was your view on trans women having access to women's spaces, and I noticed that there was a couple of journalists that took exception to that. There were a couple of feminists who disagree with your position. I happen to disagree with your position, but I don't know why that means that people have to start attacking. Like it's not. And I know how complex it is. We had a trans activist on the show, Karina Cohn, who is a very articulate, well-spoken political advocate for trans rights, who believes that male-bodied prisoners shouldn't be in women's prisons and that male-bodied people shouldn't be in rape crisis centers. But one of her main messages was that we can have this conversation and you can disagree with her and she's not going to think that you're a monster or that you don't care about women or anything like that. I think most people have an idea of what their opinions are on various issues. And that doesn't mean that if someone has a different opinion that you have to then crucify them or libel them in the press. So, I think it's a testament to, I think what you said was exactly right. I think when you're an activist for 55 years, you're going to ruffle a feather or two, and then those feathers are going to come back you with the pointed end forward, right? Sometimes, and that's sort of par for the course now, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on the trans issue, I mean, my view is that biological sex is a reality. So is transgender identity. They are different, but both are equally valid. And there doesn't need to be a war between biological women and trans women. It is wrong to suggest that trans women are predators and a threat to other women. Trans women have been using women's bathrooms for decades without a problem. All these alleged scare stories and dangers are purely hypothetical. There's been perhaps a handful of cases where trans women have abused other women, and I condemn that. But if you actually look at it, the majority of abuses of biological women are by other biological women. So it's so wrong to generalize about trans people and institute bans and restrictions based on what a small minority of people might do. For example, in the case of the Muslim community, anybody with any decency will not demonize the whole Muslim community because a handful of Muslims are terrorists. That is so wrong, and most people accept that. But that is what is happening with the trans debate. Trans people are being demonized as predators and a threat to other women when 99.9% are not and never will be. So we have to, I think, look at the evidence and look at the facts.
I think my position is even more pro-trans than that. I think that the handful of cases that you're talking about are actually cis heterosexual men who are co-opting the trans identity in order to be predators against women. And so I think that, but I also think that is where the argument creates a complexity of how to handle male body prison. Like, how do you know if the person is telling you the truth or not about, like the Karen White case? I know it's anecdotal, but it's still, to me, it exposed this like Trojan horse inside the legislation where if we can self-ID, then cis heterosexual men are going to use that Trojan horse, and sometimes successfully so, in order to be placed near vulnerable women. I don't think that happens a lot, but I think it happens. And I think that they still have to kind of figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen. Would you agree with that? Or?
Well, let's look at the reality. There are several countries that have had trans self-ID for several years. In not a single one of those countries has there been any problem. We have to look at the evidence. There isn't a problem. This is a hypothetical, a scaremongering, which is just completely out of reality. But I agree that there may, at one point, be some trans person who does bad things as a result of trans self-ID. That may be true, but you can't demonize the whole trans community based on what a handful of bad apples may do. You have to assume correctly that most trans women and trans men are not a threat to other people, and that they live exemplary lives, and they have been for many years and should be allowed to continue to do so. When it comes to trans women prisoners in women's prisons, well, I certainly agree that a trans woman who previously has a history of physical or sexual violence against women should not be placed in the general women's prison population. They should be put in segregation until there is very strong, clear evidence they are fully reformed and that they are no threat or danger. We do have to hold out the option and possibility of redemption, that people who've done bad things, whether they be trans or not, can reform and change and become good citizens. And I think that problem is that a lot of the trans critics don't allow that. They don't allow for forgiveness and redemption.
I'm going to move off of this issue. I just want to ask something that I think is sort of an overarching question, which is, if you take the general population, maybe over 40, who woke up one day and found out, because they weren't paying attention, because they have their own lives and their families and their jobs and everything, and they found out that the definition of women was no longer what it was when they were young. Do you think that there is a shortcoming in how this sort of new age of gender and definitions of gender and things like that, where it wasn't placed in front of society at large in a way that allowed people to really understand it? Like, it was almost like the rules for a lot of people, it felt like it changed overnight. Like, what do you mean a woman can have a penis? Like, there was no one, there was a lot of people who just didn't understand that from the get-go. Was there a messaging problem in this, not debate, but in this issue, this new reality?
Well, I certainly think that trans people and allies need to inform and educate. Denunciation and condemnation is not the way forward, except in very extreme circumstances where someone is clearly acting maliciously. But if someone accidentally misgenders someone, they shouldn't be roasted alive. It should be explained, why respecting someone's pronouns is important. I mean, going back to the beginnings of my activist life in the late 1960s, I was a strong supporter of the women's liberation movement. And one of its key battle cries in that era was, biology is not destiny. In other words, the way we are physiologically born should not predetermine our opportunities or lack of them in life. But now I think some feminist critics have turned this battle cry around, and they're saying that biology is destiny. That if you are born a biological male, for example, that is the way you remain forever, regardless of what your identity may be. Now, it's true that trans women, unless they've had gender reassignment surgery, do remain biological males. But they are women in the sense that they are trans women who are different from other women, but they are trans women in terms of their gender identity. And we know now that the latest research, the scientific research, suggests very strongly that trans people have different brain structures and processes compared to non-trans people. And this is the material biological basis for their gender identity. Now, I agree, the research it's about 3 or 4 major studies, but it's very strongly pointing in that direction. So the idea that transgender identity is delusional, that people are just bonkers and just making things up, I think is not supported by the new latest science.
Okay. I want to move on to one of your other tweets, because I'm a Commonwealth. I live in a Commonwealth country. I live in Canada. One of the biggest spears that I remember having as a kid, not biggest spears, but one of my concerns was that Prince Charles was going to one day be in our money. And I was really kind of put off by that idea. So when I was young, I developed a chip on my shoulder when it came to the royal family. I used to call them the longest serving welfare family of all time. I didn't like that Canada kept on sending tens of millions of dollars to the royal family every year. I was like, what is this money for? And then I saw this tweet, which was interesting. The Queen used secretive state-backed shell company to hide from the public her shares in commercial companies and their value. Did she hide them from tax inspectors too? Royal privilege. Sorry. I found that gross. I found that remarkably privileged and entitled. Are are Britons split? Because I've actually never asked anyone this question. Are they split on their support for the monarchy? Is it largely generational? Can you give me an idea of the landscape of why anyone would support a family that just gets free money? And by the way, Charles was the worst dirty talker ever. A tampon, really, Charles? Like, I don't know. So I have no respect from on any level. But can you give me an idea of what the landscape is like for their popularity in Britain?
Well, at the moment, the royal family does have majority public support, although
Jeez.
less so than, say, 10 or 15 years ago, and much less so among the younger generation. So I'd say that public opinion is beginning to shift against the monarchy and the idea that the monarch, unelected and unaccountable, should be our head of state. There is an organization called Republic, which works for a democratically elected head of state, like they have in Ireland or Germany or many other countries, but a non-executive president, not the president like the French or the US president, a president that's purely ceremonial and low cost. That's the way things are moving. Certainly until recently, Prince Charles had fairly low opinion poll ratings compared to the Queen herself. But in the wake of her death and his ascension to the throne, he seems to have had a boost. Now, I don't know whether that's going to last permanently or for how long, but I suspect when the time comes for his coronation next May, that it is very likely that, well, in the foreseeable months, in fact, leading up to the coronation, I think there will be a big public debate about the monarchy, and I think we will see more and more people asking questions and perhaps expressing reticence and doubt. The point you raised when you opened this section of the debate about the Queen having these special exemptions, this is just one of many that have been revealed. So it has been revealed that on at least 1,000 occasions, the Queen has used a special ancient procedure called Queen's consent to intervene with the government to vet laws that might affect her personal property and wealth. This is quite outrageous that the Queen, or now King Charles, has the power under this arcane ancient rule to vet legislation and to veto legislation that he does not agree with. So, for example, he's just requested a vetting of new legislation in Scotland that would affect the rights of tenants. And he's now concerned that the tenants on his Balmoral estate, which is a private estate, will be affected by these new rights given to tenants in Scottish law. The Scottish government won't say whether they have acceded to his demands for a revision. And that is even, once again, even more outrageous. The fact that a democratically elected government that's supposed to be accountable to the people won't say if Prince Charles has got this get out.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, King Charles.
yeah. Oh my God, I see. I can't even bring myself to say it. Like it just. I watch things like the Pope, or any type of royal ceremony, and I just think of Game of Thrones. And I'm not trying to be funny. I can't help it. Like there's what was used to be called. What would they call? What's that British expression? Something in pomp.
Pomp and circumstance.
Yeah, something like that. Like where it's describing, and there's always like the hats and how amazing the hats are. I'm just watching these things and I'm like, these people are so out of touch. Like there's nothing compelling, I don't think, about why they would still exist as such a powerful group. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Peter, and suggest that you're probably not pro-monarch. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been a supporter of the Republic campaign for many, many, many years. I don't think monarchy is compatible with democracy. It's a leftover and a relic from feudalism. And what is so astonishing is that under the monarchical system, whereby the monarch is our head of state, the equivalent of your prime minister or the American president, what's so outrageous is that even the most unintelligent, immoral royal is by birth of virtue into the Windsor family, if firstborn, entitled to be monarch and head of state, rather than the wisest, most moral commoner. That just cannot be right. And because, of course, the monarchy and head of state is vested in the all-white Windsor family, in terms of the line of succession, it's going to be generations before any black or brown Briton could ever be our head of state. And I think that is, by default, a form of racism. To say that the highest public office in the land, the head of state, is off limits to black and Asian Britons, I think is profoundly racist and offensive.
Was it really surprising that the redheaded stepchild married a black woman? Was that,
well,
because she doesn't get treated very well by anybody, it seems. I don't really know if she's nice or not, to be honest, but
yeah, certainly some of the old guard did raise eyebrows and suggest that this was not the marriage that Prince Harry should undertake. But of course, Harry and Meghan are well out of the line of succession. There'd have to be a mass slaughter of the more senior royals for them to ever be in a position to be king and queen.
Well, we got some footage of Charles here signing something. I don't know if he was declaring himself king. I thought it was pretty indicative of what the man is probably like in person.
Fuck's sake, mate. Fucking bollocks this is. I shouldn't have to fucking do this shit, mate. I'm the king. What the fuck is this here? Can you just fucking move this out of the way? Fucking hell, mate. Being king is bollocks. I'm fucking done with this shit.
Sorry.
That is, of course, a spoof video.
Yes,
but
of course.
He did get exasperated with those pens and other instruments in his way, and let rip, and that showed his sort of I suppose temper.
How old is Charles? Is he like 80 now?
Oh no, I think 72 or 3. I think. Yeah, I think 73. Good. I think, but but he is the oldest monarch to ascend to the throne.
Wow. Okay, I want to move on a little bit because this one also caught my eye. We're going over your tweets because I didn't want to just talk about the same old stuff with you anymore. But David Beckham blocked the first openly gay Qatari on Instagram after he raised questions about the abuse of LGBT plus rights in Qatar and questioned why Beckham was accepting $150 million to do PR promoting the homophobic regime. I am with you on that. I can't stand it when I hear about people like David Beckham or people like Beyonce or whoever going to perform in places like Qatar or Saudi Arabia, where they literally execute you if you are gay. And they always have all these amazing reasons why they do it, except they really only have one, and that is a dollar sign. Has there been any blowback for David Beckham on this, or is the press doing what they normally do, most of the press anyways, and just kind of like, what are you going to do?
Certainly, there's been quite a lot of shock and dismay that David Beckham, who once said he was proud to be an LGBT plus icon, has accepted money from a regime where, you're right, LGBT plus people can be arrested, jailed, subjected to forcible conversion therapy, and even in extreme circumstances, executed under Sharia law. It is really mind-boggling that he would dare accept this money, but obviously money does talk, and he has decided that money is more important than principles and human rights.
Why was David Beckham a gay icon?
Well, he always prided himself on being supportive of the LGBT plus community. He paid homage to LGBT plus style in his dress and deportment. He supported and backed LGBT plus events, so that won him a lot of plaudits. But I think those are sadly, fast disappearing. He's gone from LGBT plus icon to a defender of a homophobic regime.
We talked earlier about Russia, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble or anything, but what's Ukraine's record on LGBT plus communities? What is their if you happen to know what their policies are, what society at large think over in Ukraine about gay issues?
Ukraine does have a checkered history, but there have been steady gains for LGBT plus people over recent years. For example, unlike in Russia, LGBT plus people can hold pride events and parades, and they are fully protected by the police from neo-Nazis and extremists. LGBT plus organizations openly organize, they openly exist. There's no restrictions on their activities. And recently there's been a big push to win civil unions or civil marriages in Ukraine. And President Zelensky has indicated that he's prepared to look at that, but he wants to delay it until after the war is over. He says we need to focus on the war. I don't see why you can't do both, but he hasn't dismissed it. He hasn't criticized the idea. He said he will look at it. So LGBT plus people in Ukraine are much, much happier than those in Russia. And indeed, one of the reasons why many LGBT plus people are volunteering in the Ukrainian armed forces is because they know that if Russia conquered Ukraine, it would be a huge setback for LGBT plus rights and people.
Do you think that the way that Zelensky's image has been sort of, I would say, produced, I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but there's a heavy amount of image fixing and gloss, let's just say, put over him. Do you think that one of the silver linings of that, because I find that to be kind of propaganda. It's not as bad as Russia, clearly, but like I don't know if you saw the photo shoot that they did. I think it was for GQ, where him and his wife were standing all like fashion models in front of like tanks and buildings that have been blown to bits, and I thought that was gross. But do you think that one of the silver linings of a highly produced image like that is that they kind of have no choice now but to do things that are a little bit more progressive now that the world is watching?
Absolutely. There is undoubtedly a lot of pressure on Ukraine to fully conform to the European Convention on Human Rights, which it does in most parts, in most respects. But the pressure has increased. And I think also there is quite a sea change in public attitudes in Ukraine. It's very difficult to say because there have been no real authoritative polls taken since the war began. But certainly the anecdotal evidence is that ordinary Ukrainians seeing the involvement and support of LGBT plus people in the war effort, it has changed their perceptions. And so, unlike Russia, public opinion is definitely going in favor and towards LGBT plus rights in Ukraine.
We're going to wrap up soon, but I wanted to just talk about a couple more things. One of them is that I think that I would like to create a phrase where I paraphrase an existing one and say that Tatch don't crack, because you're 70 years old and you don't look like you're 70 years old. And I'm wondering if it is the activism that keeps you young, because a lot of people would theorize that being so active in civil rights and in gay rights that it would wear you down. But you look great. And I'm wondering what your secret is.
Well, I've got to say that there have been moments of great stress and even depression, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, those malicious smears and slurs against me, those false allegations, but also, of course, the many violent assaults I've experienced. Over the last 5 decades plus, I've been physically violently assaulted over 300 times. Over 300 times. There's been more than 50 attacks upon my flat, my apartment, including 3 arson attacks and even a bullet through my front door. It's been tough. I don't deny that. And there've been moments when I've really struggled. But what has kept me going is this belief, this passion for human rights, for universal human rights, and the sense that I would want someone to help me if I was suffering. So therefore, I feel a duty to stand in solidarity with others when they are suffering. And I think if we all had that attitude, a lot of the world's injustices would be very quickly resolved.
I'm sure you probably believe that the incrementalism is not steep enough, but from 1965 to 2022, How far have we come?
Well, we have made huge progress. Many of the world's great injustices, like apartheid, are history. The Soviet Empire and its tyranny is over. We see in many countries greater public services and benefits for people who are disadvantaged by reasons of unemployment or ill health. We are making some progress, although not nearly enough, on protecting the environment. I think history goes in like snakes and ladders. You make progress and then maybe slip back a bit. But overall, the trend is towards greater progress. And that's what inspires me and keeps me going. That's what, keeps me young and keeps me active and, makes me want to carry on. I can see the changes that myself and millions of other people around the world have wrought, the positive changes, the life-enhancing changes that have been won. And I just want to keep on doing more of it and work with others to achieve that.
I want to let you know, because since the last time I talked to you, your mom passed away. So I wanted to send you my condolences for that. It was a very compelling facet of the movie, watching you interact with your mother, who you knew didn't support your lifestyle, she would probably call it, or whatever, but and that it was grounded in sort of a religious belief. And I loved how you loved her anyways, because I think you saw how a societal construct can shape beliefs into a direction that, isn't beneficial necessarily, but she's still your mom, right?
Yeah, I mean, she was born in 1927 in a completely different era from today, with completely different values, and she was brought up in a very strict evangelical Pentecostal church. So she, of course, was very strongly influenced by that. But I've got to say that over the years, she did grow and she did come round. She still, to the day she died, believed that homosexuality is wrong because it says so in the Bible, and she's a Bible-believing Christian. But she doesn't see it as a major sin when it's between consenting adults. And she has actually supported my LGBT plus human rights work. She thinks what I'm doing is right, what I have been doing is right, and she thinks that homophobia is a terrible sin. She's always welcomed my partner. My partner and I just spoke to her just 2 weeks before she died, and she was always being welcoming and supportive and treated him as part of the family.
So that's
that's a fantastic example of someone growing and being willing to listen and learn.
I know it sounds harsher than I intended to sound, but hate the sin, love the sinner seems to be, better than, because there's a lot of hating the sinners. Like, I'm an atheist. There's still countries I can't go to because if they find out I don't believe in God, that I can get killed, right? And they all, which is crazy to me because I don't feel like an oppressed person or anything like that. But it's ridiculous. And before I let you go, can you please tell Stephen Fry that I fucking jumped through the goddamn hoops that he made me jump through by writing him a goddamn handwritten letter and he never got back to me? Can you please send that message to him, because he won't leave an email address. If you want to get a hold of Stephen Fry, you have to write him a letter. And I did, and that was a year ago. I didn't get anything back.
Well, the only thing I can say in his defense is he probably gets tens of thousands. But he does, I think, have staff. So his staff should at least draw it to his attention and let you know.
They might have needed a doctor to decipher my awful penmanship, since I haven't written a handwritten letter in like 20 years. So that could be it. Peter, it's always a pleasure having you. Let's do this again sooner than later. And thank you for joining us here today.
Well, thank you. And just remind your viewers, if you're interested to find out about my work, please watch the Netflix documentary, Hating Peter Tatchell. It's streaming now. And go to my website, my foundation's website, petertatchellfoundation.org. In the top right-hand corner, there's a button which says Join Us. If you give us your email address, we will send you a weekly bulletin on a range of LGBT plus and other human rights issues. It's totally free. And of course, if you don't like it, you can always subscribe. Most of the stories are very serious, but we always try to include a funny or quirky one to give you a laugh as well.
Well, I've been to the site and I read up on the organization before the first interview that we did. You guys do great work. Thank you for still fighting the fight, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yep. Thanks, James, and best
Thanks,
wishes
Peter.
to all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much, Peter. That is Peter Tatchell. He is a brilliant guy. And please go to Netflix and watch the movie Hating Peter Tatchell. It is so good. You know, I'm from Canada, as many of my listeners are. I did not know of Peter Tatchell before I saw this documentary, and I'm glad I watched it. Like I said, he does amazing work, and we were happy to have him today on Blackballed. Tomorrow on Blackballed, we will have M. Greiner. She is an author and a musician who once toured with David Bowie. So that should be fun. And then on Friday, we have Heinous Cases with Rob Kivlikin. And I'm so excited that I'm going to announce it now before I go, that next week, I have booked on the 21st at 10 a.m., which is 10 p.m. Singapore time, Major One. She's dope. I cannot wait. And so, yes, I got to get out of here because I know the Dean Blundell show is starting in about 5 minutes. So we will see you next time on Blackballed. Thanks, everybody.
Blackballed. 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 Blackballed.